the continuing worksheet, looking at potential adjustments. We have narrowed it down. We are starting with the balanced budget and then making changes from there. So the changes on the board now are changes that have been suggested. Let's go through the other departments as far as any changes to suggested changes, and then we're going to have to go through each of these and make some majority decision as to whether we want those changes included or not. So, yes, Mayor Pro Tem Motz.
Don, I forgot to mention that after our meeting today for the sesquicentennial, the consensus was that we changed the 50,000 from 2021 to 1920.
Okay, and so pull it out of the 2021 and put it into the 1920.
Yes, we're moving that up, starting.
Because I can't spell sesquicentennial, I'm just going to put 150 year.
Thank you.
What's that? Are there allocated funds for the sesquicentennial?
What we've put in the 2021 balanced budget is $50,000 to get it started, since it takes place in fiscal year 22, which is 1 year outside. So we put the 50,000.
Right, it's in there. It's in the balanced budget. What we're asking is for it to be moved into from 2021 to 1920, because we're already starting and we're going to have to, we're going to start looking to utilize some of that money for planning. And,
right. So if
whatnot.
you'll see on the spreadsheet, I did a negative 50,000 to reduce expenditures, and I added it back into the second column.
It'll just give it'll give us access to be able to start potentially working on a logo that says 150, those kind of things. And we'll bring all that back to council for approval before we get any of that made anyway. But the budget will won't have to be approved, is the idea. Have we looked at community development already? We go through community development.
We did not specifically, we discussed the changes, but it would be good, as you stated, to go through each department now that we've gone through the police department to say whether you bless or want to make adjustments.
So community development, I'm just wondering if anybody asked for adjustments to be made on community development, or they were okay with the balanced budget approach to that department. Councilmember Thorpe.
I'm fine with community development.
So we're okay leaving community development as the balanced budget approach?
Yeah, I think we answered the questions as far as the how many code enforcement that would total, and then also the general laborers. So I'm good.
Are we okay with information systems computer technician, the one computer technician for the balanced budget approach? Everybody's okay with that? Public Works, basically their requests are fairly net neutral, using other funds, and are we okay with that approach? Recreation, reclassify specialists, these creating are we okay with that approach?
Mayor. So is this for
Overton.
4 reclassifications? Okay, no, I'm thinking maybe one this year and then one next year, but not 4 this year.
Councilmember Thorpe.
I'm fine with the recommendation, with the balanced
Budget approach. Mayor Pro Tem Motz.
I'm good with that, with the requests from the recreation.
Councilmember Wilson.
I'm fine with their request.
So
Okay.
leaving that alone as the balanced budget approach. The city manager that was put up there, is that right?
So
You
what
already put that?
I did to make sure I captured it correctly, because I believe Councilmember Motz said to recommended changing to a contract. And I believe she said 50,000 the first year and 100,000 the second year, if I'm correct. So that 13,941 brings that 63,941 down to 50, and that 38,954 brings that down to 100,000. So hopefully I've captured that correctly. And then keeping the assistant city manager position, so basically increasing expenditures for that.
I think that was what was suggested. And we can have that discussion here in a minute. Human resources has not been discussed. Is that, everybody's okay for that, from the balanced budget approach? Finance.
And then not inclusive of the staffing, we did touch on economic development. I know you brought it up in your youth task force PowerPoint, but we should also discuss the recreation, 350,000 and 700,000 as well. And if you want to keep that in the balanced, I won't notate anything more on this.
So the balanced budget approach has the 350,000 for year one and 700.
It has a 700,000, and as
And year
Councilmember
two.
Thorpe referenced, it includes the additional community grant funding, which is a separate pot from the 700,000.
So that, I'm okay with that.
So that's, I'm looking at your assumptions here, so it's already included, correct, in the balanced budget?
Yes,
Correct.
it's in the
Okay,
balance.
Yes.
okay.
So,
Can I?
yeah, Councilmember Overchalk.
Okay, so it's not that I'm not okay with it, I don't know where the money's going to be spent until we get a budget of where those funds and what the need of those funds are. I'm not okay with it. I was talking to the school district and doing some research on my own. There's a lot of children in the school district, like 16,433 in AUSD and then 821 in the charter schools. I have concerns because I don't know that the ad hoc committee has talked to the superintendent of schools. We have the schools to partner with, so I don't know if those funds have been discussed, that they'll pay for a portion of it, or maybe they'll put the schools out there and we can use the schools, they can pay for the janitors. I don't know if it's considered using Nick Rodriguez building and the community center. So there's a lot of things that, I need a little bit more information on where those monies are going to be spent, and then how they're going to be shown that what the youth, how do I say this, what the youth are getting out of the programs, like a metrics. So those
And
are my
we-
questions.
We agree with you. What we're asking is for those monies to be set aside so that as the youth program director comes in and works with the school district on how best to utilize those, then comes back and asks us, but the money's set aside to be able to utilize for the recommendations that come forward. Those recommendations will come to council and be approved, and if they're not approved, the money won't be spent. Does that make sense? So you will still have final say over how that money gets spent. Does that make sense? So we're not asking for here's money, go spend it however you want. We're just asking for that money to be set aside so that as recommendations come back from this person that comes in, that we can then look at it, and it's not where's the money coming from, that money's been set aside. So am I speaking out of turn, Mayor, or Councilmember Thorpe? Sorry, Mayor Pro Tem.
He's really having a hard time with
Yeah,
me tonight, isn't he?
No, you're not. You're right on the money. And just to emphasize, that was why we authorized the hiring of the network manager, so that they establish these partnerships. And we talked about the roundtable, or the network, to identify service gaps and all that good stuff. So from my vantage point, we're just setting money aside so that as they're building, we're not scratching our heads wondering where the money is going to come from.
Right, but I mean, there's 350 this year and 700 next year, and 50,000 added to the grants for the rec center. So, I mean, could it be like 350 this year and 350 next year until you know exactly what's going to happen? I mean,
We can ask the rest of the council, do you want 350 next year?
Honestly, I think that there's an opportunity with our ad hoc committee with the city schools to have a broader conversation on what, joint use might look like, and, cross-promotion, all of those things. So I think as we're working through this and, forming this collaboration and determining how we're going forward, that these funds, I think, for now we could use this as a set-aside, and, we can make determinations as we go forward how, whether that amount of money is needed or not, and if we have able to work closely with the schools, and if we're supporting each other on this effort, I think, all the better. So I'm okay with the assumption we've made.
Councilmember Wilson?
Yeah,
again, not to echo what everybody else is saying, but I'm fine with the set aside money. We use what's needed. If we determine that we don't need all of it, then we don't spend all of it. But I like the fact that we're setting it aside just for now until we till we find out more information. So I'm fine with it.
I'll just make another comment too, and I think, Mary, you made, comments earlier about how, this was a priority on Measure W, and, this is a very little amount of funds that we're actually putting forward for youth services right now. So I don't think this is, something we should be worried about. Like you think you said it was less than 5% or of the Measure
It's
W
5%
funds.
of,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I think this is reasonable.
All right, that takes us, are there any other departments we have not discussed? That
No,
takes us
that
through the
covers
departments,
everything
right?
on this page, so now it's just before you to look at what we've come up with these numbers, seeing how, the way everything's on here now, we have a surplus of just about 600,000 in the first fiscal year, so let me get the fiscal year showing, and then, I'll collapse these lines, and in the second year, 900,000 deficit spending. So it's up to you if you want to keep these as stated, discuss and make some shifts in what you've added to the balanced budget, take something away.
I would like to look at the assistant city manager. I've talked to the city manager about not having that position and holding off, not funding that position in either budget and coming back after a year if we determine after a year that there's funds and it's a position that we would need. That would be a suggestion that I would make, is to remove the assistant city manager position.
Mayor, may I? I agree with what
Councilmember
you're saying.
Robert.
I apologize with what you're saying. But I would like to add the PIO so that he does have that public information officer that he
agree.
needs. Thank you.
I agree with both those comments. Mayor Pro Tem Motz.
Well, as much as I think Ron needs support, if he thinks he could survive another year, I would be willing to, consider waiting another year for that. But I am firm on getting somebody in here as far as a public information officer. One of our biggest challenges, I think, has been the perception of our community. We are working on that through the community development and all, but having somebody there that can support the narrative for our community, I think, is critical. So I'm not in favor of removing, I don't think we need to hire somebody, but we need to look at
I think the
contracts.
change that Councilmember Overchuk made was not to get rid of the PIO, but was actually to hire the PIO. So that's not a contract, so it was an actual hired position.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
I
It wasn't
see.
to get rid of it.
okay.
So to keep the
Appreciate that.
PIO as is in the balance, or
As is in the balanced.
full-time city employee, so.
Sorry about that, thank you.
Right, it's already right, the full-time PIO is already in the balanced figure. The amount that I removed was just reducing it to a contract amount that was recommended by Councilmember Mott. So are there any more modifications that you would like to see on this or review? Or would you like us to move forward with this?
So I'm sorry, so the FTE on the PIO is 149?
Correct. And this salary that's listed, I believe, as I mentioned before, we do not currently have this position, so I mirrored this to an administrative analyst position. Once Human Resources creates the job spec and actually, they compare what this is paid in other cities, so forth, it may come in a little bit higher. I can't say that for sure, but I took an administrative analyst position to compare the salary to. Just want to make that clear.
Thank you.
Now, if looking at year two, right now we're at a deficit. We do have the rate stabilization fund, which was set aside for that. Is that correct? I mean, we would transfer rate
We
stabilization.
wouldn't have to pull from it in this 2021 fiscal year because we are above the 20% level. It would be just continuing these out in the projections because that 530,000 is going to grow exponentially every year by the staffing. It's, I don't want to say the word optimistic, so it's hard to say with budget, but with that dollar amount, it is possible that some other types of revenues could come in to cover that. I'm not going to say for sure they will. You know, particularly if something happens with cannabis, we could get enough to cover that. Again, we don't have projections for the cannabis. It's a new business for us. We're still working on the DA, what the, you know, figures are going to be. So council can either decide to evaluate this staffing and maybe reconsider some of the other positions in 1 year. For example, if they wanted to start with 2 CSOs and look at another 2 in a year so that the jail is done, that's something that could happen. Or if they want to go forward with this plan, and we'll build this into the
So,
budget.
6 CSOs are in here right now?
4.
So there's no CSOs in the balanced budget,
We
except
added
for what we
4.
already have, right. So the request was made by Council Member Ogerchok to add in 4 CSOs from the initial 6 that were requested.
Well, can we see what it looks like with 2?
Yes, let me get that number for you. So the surplus is just a little over $1 million in 1920 with that number, and it about cuts the number in half for the deficit in the second year.
I personally am still in favor of 4 CSOs. I think the chief has made a good case for 4 CSOs to make our officers more efficient, so that's
And I
where
second that.
that's where I stand.
So, you know, I guess my concern is year, 3, 4, and 5 out. We were able to see that clearly before in what we looked like in the enhanced budget, and how that just decimated our, not taking into consideration any additional revenue, it just decimated our, our reserves and our stabilization fund. So can we see, or is that too much to do, Don, what that looks like, 3, 4, 5?
The hard thing to do is, all I would be able to do at this point is just take this total number and carry it out, because the projections were done on factoring in salary projections for each of those years, so it wouldn't be quite as accurate. It would just be the same number carried forward and going out, so that would be the...
So you would be taking into salary increases and,
Right.
but that should get us pretty close. I mean, we'd have an idea.
So let's see if I can get this total here.
I think to Don's earlier comments, I think the closer we get to the enhanced, the more we're going to eat into the funds more quickly. That's going to happen. The thing I would suggest is that in 2 years, we're looking to potentially have cannabis revenues that might offset this.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't, there are changes and things that we can adjust as we go forward.
Correct, except just realize with anything with the staffing, anything you authorize in staffing, if that is hired, you don't want to turn around and say,
Right.
hey, office assistant, I'm just picking that because it's right there, you don't have a job anymore. We've authorized you hiring in 2 years now, we don't have the revenue for it. So you have to consider the employee impact of that as well. Not necessarily that would happen, but you want to be thoughtful in your considerations of what you're improving for staffing.
So again, looking at the CSOs, I'm still in favor of the 4 CSOs. And I believe Councilmember Ogerchok. We're looking for a consensus or on either 4 or 2.
Well, it's a leap of faith. It is. So Kwame better get busy. No pressure.
We're giving
I mean,
them
just to
more money to get
consider
busy.
the total of the, of this 2021, I totaled it as 920,000. So if you just carry that out every year, that's 900,000 over 5 years. So, there's your almost $5 million comparatively, so without me having to recreate 5 years on the fly right here.
Can I ask a question of Chief? We just asked the city manager to go without a assistant city manager to help him. How important is that office assistant for you?
Well, as I had
Usable.
mentioned, it's that first line of contact that people have when they walk into the animal shelter. So this is the person who is going to help people as they walk in, help with the licensing and do everything. So it's, from a public contact standpoint, it's pretty integral, but.
I'm cool. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm cool. Now, I understand what Dawn has done in year one is figured it's going to take 6 months to hire, and so she's only factored in a half a year salary on that. That's why in year one it is the lower payment. So by year two, we're factoring in a full year, so.
Mayor,
Councilmember Overchuk.
I recommend we accept this at this point.
I'm okay with accepting this.
You don't think we could save some money on the PIO, the contract?
I think from the PIO standpoint, I think what we've done, if you go contract, you don't have somebody, we did that with the city attorney. We basically had a contract city attorney, and it was a lot harder for our city manager to work directly with that person. Bringing Thomas in has been a godsend for our city attorney to be able to work hand in hand with. And I think you're going to see that with the PIO as well, that somebody there working directly with him and staff at all of the meetings, at those, we're going to see a lot more bang for our buck than working with a contract.
I'm fine with a contractor and just keeping the cost down, particularly overall.
I mean, but until we would go out to bid too, I mean, a contract PAO could end up being the same price. We honestly don't know, since I said we're just, taking the cost from an administrative analyst. So I'm not one way or another advocating, I'm just saying it could end up being the same price.
Do we want to put it in as PIO/contractor and allow that to be something that we decide as we figure out costs on?
Yeah, I mean, you could absolutely do that and just keep it for the cost that it's in there. And if we find either method comes in more, we would, bring it to council that, hey, we found it's going to cost X dollars now.
So question, so if this PIO is FTE, and this is probably a question for Nikki, how long if we eventually authorize it, how long before that person would be up and running for us? By the time you go through the whole process? December?
Well, that's the one reason we did the 6 months for lives, because this one, it doesn't even have a job spec. So a job spec's going to have to be written. That's going to have to come to council. A salary, table's going to have to be established, so.
Versus a contract, the amount of time.
Right, could start that now.
So through the mayor, if I might jump in, I think it would be advantageous to have a contract PIO immediately with a full-time person down the road, say in 2020, something like that. And at least we can hit the ground right now and we'd have to bring something back to you, obviously, but I think starting sooner than July 1st would be better.
I think we've got consensus on that.
I would keep the PIO.
So we don't know what to tell you to put in the number boxes, though.
Right.
You don't know what to put in the number boxes.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I would say let's just keep these numbers in there for now as a placeholder. And then I can tell you if there is consensus, since I've heard at least two to go forward with this budget. We'll go back definitely, because this isn't the final version. We'll go back and we'll, sharpen our pencils and see if there's any revenue numbers that, hey, in looking at this, we can bump this up a little bit, or maybe we can shave a little off here and see if we can get that $530,000 a little bit more compacted, a little bit smaller, even if it's just, 100,000, 200,000. So it's not going to be the last time we look at the general fund budget. We'll be continually working on it now through when we come back in June for final adoption. We hope that when we bring the draft budget together, it's our best representation of what council has directed, and hopefully at that point be no further changes. So if we can go forward with this, then the next study sessions will be looking at CIP and the other funds of the city.
I don't have a problem with that. Any other changes?
Consensus on the 4 too.
I have not heard consensus on the 4 or the 2 yet.
Chief, I have a question for you. It's going to basically be the same. You've already heard this a couple times. The bear, because I know you and I have talked about this. So you could go if we only did 2. You would be okay with 2 CSOs. I mean, I
I
know
would
we're
use
at
the 2
4.
CSOs as jailers, yes. When we started talking about the 4 CSOs, that's when we see an impact on patrol services in which we allow CSOs to handle the lower priority calls for service. But with 2 CSOs, they would work in a jailer capacity.
Which right now you don't have anybody in jail.
We do. It would expand the hours so that we have more coverage throughout the day, enabling, especially as we get into the later hours into the evening, officers would be able to go back out on the street instead of going out to Martinez.
Thank you. I mean, since now, I mean, this is still a fluid process. I mean, for now, I can look at 2, and then to see how, you know, as we go through this process, see where we end up in this.
So it would essentially cut that deficit in half, right?
Right, and if you
2.
went with the 2, it could be the same thing as with the assistant city manager position, that at mid-year, when we come back in a year, you can consider also reevaluating, adding an additional 2. That could be the direction as well, so.
Chief, question, if we were to get to 4, right, and we got that 2 additional, what kind of impact, and this is the impact that I'm looking for, what kind of impact are we going to see on those type 3 and type 4 calls as far as response by our police department to be able to get to respond to those in a quicker time manner?
Are you talking about if we only had 2
No, if we
additional
have 4,
CSOs?
if
or
we
have 4?
have the 4.
As I had mentioned, on average, a CSO would probably, and it depends on the call for service and a number of other factors. I mean, I can't just give you a specific number, but on average, I would say they would respond to probably 8 to 10 calls for service. So each person, so that's 8 to 10 calls for service that an officer would have normally responded to had we not had the CSOs out in the field. And that's per shift, you know, and so if I have 2 CSOs working out in the field, now we're looking at, you know, anywhere between 16 and 20 calls for service in a day's time during the shift that those CSOs are working, that officers are being freed up for other priority calls.
Right. So I think we have 2 for 4 and 2 for 2.
2 for 2. Who's 2 for 2?
Lamar is for 2 CSOs.
All right, how about 3? Just break the tie.
What does
But
3
did you
look
want to
like?
see, let's look
Yeah,
at the
see
number
what
for
3 looks
3.
like.
What is does 3 work, Chief? I mean,
Sure. The even number, just because we work a 7-day-a-week operation, we have 2 shifts that work to cover all 7 days. So if I have 2, I'll put 1 on one side of the week and 1 on the other. If I have just 1 that is working out in the field, I would probably put them on, you know, some sort of 5/8 schedule or 4/10 schedule that would probably try and cover the busier days of the week, to try and busier in the days in which we have those lower priority calls so that they can handle more of those.
I mean, if we did 3 and then, you know, we can reevaluate this too in 6 months and see if we're in a position to.
Yeah, well, we can do 2 and evaluate it at the
mid-year.
mid-year.
Yeah, we can still stay at 4, and we wouldn't have to do that.
And yeah, but we're trying to.
I understand, but still, I mean, we're trying to help reduce response times and
We could
keep
do
our
4 and
officers
evaluate
free.
for 6, just saying.
Yeah. Don't go there.
I'm not mad at you for
Don't go there.
So we could reevaluate it at the mid-year.
Joy, I would say whatever number you decide to put up there is the number that ends up going up there. Right now, we have 2 for 4, 2 for 2. Whatever number you decide to go with, I think, is the number we move forward with, so.
Is that 3 right there?
That's 3, yes. And
I'm
I
a-
would, if you go with that, then I'll change that little 4 CSOs to 3. So.
I'm going to say 3.
All right. So I think I'm in consensus with moving forward with that number, if that's the number that gets us to 3. Lori, are you okay with that? All right, then. It sounds like we have consensus on this number going forward.
Okay, we will incorporate these into the budget, and like I said, we'll definitely, sharpen our pencils for the second fiscal year and see if there's any little slight tweaks we can make here or there and try and close that gap a little bit more. We may not entirely be able to wipe it out, but if we can get it down some more, we will. And then the next step is we'll be bringing forth CIP and the other funds going forward. So we'll keep our study sessions going prior to the council meetings. They shouldn't be as long now because the other funds aren't quite as involved. So we should be able to get through those a little bit quicker. So thank you all for your input. We really appreciate it.
Very good. Are there any public comments?
None received.
Seeing none, this meeting stands adjourned.
And one thing, I just want to tell Dawn how much I appreciate all the work that you've put into this. You and staff have been awesome during this process. I know it's been long and tedious, and I do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Meeting stands adjourned. Thank you all.